I have told this story maybe 40 times now, to my brood cousins, to recruits who think they already understand the galaxy, once to a council adjutant who did not believe a word of it until he checked the records himself and went very, very quiet. And every time I tell it, I start the same way. There was a girl, she was small. She did not talk much. And for 3 months the biggest, loudest, meanest cadet on Ardent Spire treated her like she was nothing. He was wrong about her. He was so wrong about her that I still get a cold feeling along my dorsal ridge when I remember the day he found out. Let me tell you how it happened. My name is Toa. I am Wesson if that means anything to you, and out beyond the third arm it usually doesn't. We are a small people, soft-furred, flat-toothed, built for grazing and for running away from things. My grandmother used to say the Wessons survived this long because we are very good at one thing, noticing when to leave a room. So when I was selected for officer training at Ardent Spire, my whole settlement thought there had been a clerical error. Ardent Spire was a teeth-and-claw place, a military academy bolted onto an old mining station, swinging in a slow orbit around a dead orange star called Malek. 12,000 cadets, 60-some species, the kind of place where you learn the rank insignia of every other student fast, because misreading them could get you a beating in a stairwell. I want you to picture it. The light there was always wrong, that thick amber color, like everything had been dipped in old honey. The corridors smelled of coolant and 300 different kinds of sweat. There was a constant low hum from the station's core that you stopped hearing after a week and then heard in your dreams for the rest of your life. And it was loud. Gods, it was loud. Cadets shouting across the mess, boots on metal grating, the clatter of training weapons. Somewhere there was always a fight or a drill or somebody being made an example of. That was the world. Now let me tell you about the 2 people in it who mattered. The first was Garak Vel. You would have noticed him the second he entered a room because the room got smaller when he did. Garak was Korath. If you've never met a Korath, imagine something built like a siege door, broad, plated, dark green-gray, with a wide jaw full of ridged teeth and arms thick enough that he could palm a Wesson's whole skull. They come from a heavy world, the Korath, and they're proud of it. They never stop reminding you. Garak was the loudest of all the loud ones. He laughed like a hull breach. He took up 2 seats at the mess and dared anybody to say something. And he had a little crowd that followed him, 3 or 4 cadets who'd figured out early that it was safer to be behind Garak than in front of him. He wasn't stupid. That's the thing people get wrong when I tell this part. They want him to be a dumb brute. He wasn't. He was sharp and quick, and he topped the close combat rankings every single cycle. He earned that ranking. I watched him put a Drennick twice my size on the mat so fast I didn't see the throw, just heard the slam. But he was cruel, and he was cruel in the worst way, the smart way. He knew exactly where to push. He could find the soft place in a person in about 10 seconds, and he never, ever forgot where it was. He found mine in my first week. I won't tell you what he said. It still works even now after all these years. That's how good he was at it. So that was Garak Vel, the biggest fish in a pond full of sharp little knives. The second person was Iris Calder. She came in late, half a cycle after the rest of us, which was unusual. Ardent Spire didn't do staggered intakes. There was some paperwork delay, some quarantine clearance her homeworld required that nobody else had ever heard of. The word went around before she even arrived. Deathworlder. Now I need to stop and explain something, because if you're galaxy soft like I was back then, you don't know what that word does to a room. There are maybe a dozen confirmed Deathworlds in charted space. Worlds where the gravity is wrong, where the air is thick as soup, where everything that grows wants to eat you, and everything that moves wants to do worse. Most of them have no native sentient life, because sentient life can't get a foothold somewhere that hostile. Humans are the exception. Humans came from one, and the ones who still live there, not the ones spread out soft across the colonies, But the ones from the original Cradle worlds, they have a reputation. The reputation is this: don't. Just don't push them. Don't crowd them. Don't make them angry. The galaxy doesn't have a lot of firm rules, but that one is written in old blood. So when the word Deathworlder went around, half the cadets got nervous and the other half, the Garrock half, got interested. Then Iris Calder actually walked into the mess hall, and everybody relaxed. Because she was small. I mean that. By human standards she was not large, and humans are not large to begin with. She came up to about the middle of Garrock's chest. She was thin through the shoulders, pale, dark hair cut short and uneven like she'd done it herself with a field knife. Her uniform hung a little loose. She moved slow and careful, and she kept her eyes mostly down, and she did not say one single word. She got her food. She found the emptiest corner of the emptiest table. She sat with her back to the wall. I noticed that even then, though I didn't understand it yet, and she ate, quietly, looking at nothing. A Drenic at the next table said, loud enough to carry, "That's a Deathworlder. Looks like a stiff wind would finish her." People laughed. And Iris Calder just kept eating. I remember thinking, oh, she's going to have a hard time here. I had no idea. The thing I figured out about Iris before anyone else, and I figured it out only because I am Wesson, and noticing is the one thing we're good at, was that she was never not paying attention. She looked like she was staring at nothing. She wasn't. I sat across the mess from her for weeks, and I watched her track the room, every door, every cadet who came in. The exact moment the serving line opened and the exact moment it backed up. She knew where Garrock and his crowd were at all times without ever once looking directly at them. She was the calmest person I had ever seen, and it was not the calm of someone relaxed. It was the calm of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that panicking was a luxury that got you killed. I tried to talk to her once in the third week. I sat down across from her, terrifying for me. I'd practiced it, and I said something stupid like, "The protein bricks are better on the days the line's slow." She looked at me, really looked for the first time. Her eyes were a flat gray, like cooled metal, and for 1 second I felt like I was being measured, weighed, and filed away. Then something in her softened just a little, and she said, "Thanks, I'll remember." Her voice was quiet and rough, like she didn't use it much. That was the whole conversation. But she nodded at me in the corridor the next day, and after that, I sort of unofficially became the only friend Iris Calder had on Ardent Spire. Which is how I ended up close enough to watch the whole thing happen. It started small. These things always do. Garrock noticed her in the 4th week. I think he'd been ignoring her up to then, because a quiet small thing in a corner wasn't worth his attention. But somebody must have reminded him she was the Deathworlder, because one day at the mess he got up, walked across the whole hall with his crowd trailing him, and stood over her table. The whole room went quiet. Garrock standing over you was an event. "You're the Deathworlder," he said. Iris kept eating, didn't look up. "I heard you're kind or tough." He grinned around at his crowd. "You don't look tough." She set her utensil down, slow, and she said in that flat, quiet voice, "I'm just trying to eat." Now here is the part people never understand. She wasn't being meek. I was close enough to see her hands, and her hands were not the hands of someone scared. They were still, completely still, resting flat on the table. She was being patient. The way you're patient with weather. The way you're patient with a thing you've decided isn't worth the effort. But Garrock read it as weakness. Of course he did. That was his whole skill, finding weakness, and when he couldn't find it, he invented it. He reached down and took the protein brick right off her tray, picked it up in 2 thick fingers, held it up, and made a show of sniffing it. "Deathworld food," he said. "Maybe I'll keep it, build me up, make me tough like you." His crowd laughed. Iris looked at the empty spot on her tray, then up at him. And for 1/2 of 1 second, I swear this on my grandmother's grave, something moved behind her eyes. Something old and cold and very, very still, like the moment before a heavy door swings shut. Then it was gone. She just said okay and got up and dumped her tray and left. Garak roared with laughter. His crowd roared with him. He tossed the protein brick into the recycler and swaggered back to his table like he'd won a war. And I sat there with my fur standing up all along my spine, and I thought, he doesn't know what he just looked at. I didn't fully know either, but Wesson instincts are about one thing, sensing the predator before the predator moves, and every instinct I had was screaming. If she'd fought him that first day, I think it would have ended differently. Cleaner. He'd have learned, the room would have learned, and that would have been that. But Iris didn't fight. Not the first day, not the 10th, not the 30th. That was the part that drew the whole thing out into the slow, awful spiral it became. Because Garak was a hunter, and a hunter cannot resist a thing that runs. He started small, like I said, the protein brick. Then it was bumping into her in the corridor, those huge shoulders, sending her into the wall. Then it was words. He had 100 of them. He found out she was quiet and decided she was stupid. He found out she kept to herself and decided she was a coward. He found out she never fought back and decided she couldn't. Deathworlder, he'd say in front of everyone. Big scary Deathworlder, can't even hold her own tray. And every time Iris took it, she'd go still, she'd wait, and then she'd leave. I asked her about it once. We were in the observation gallery, this long curved window where you could watch Malek burn its dull orange light over the station. Almost nobody went there. It was one of the only quiet places on the spire, and I think that's why she liked it. I said, "Why don't you stop him?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Where I'm from there's a kind of grass cat, big, fast, they hunt in the long grass." She wasn't looking at me, she was looking out at the star. If you run from one it chases, always. If you fight one sometimes you win and sometimes it opens you up from throat to belly before you land a blow. She paused. But if you stand still, completely still, most of the time it loses interest, decides you're not prey, walks away. And if it doesn't walk away... She turned and looked at me with those flat gray eyes. "Then there's no more reason to be still," she said. I didn't sleep well that night. Let me tell you about Deathworld humans, because by now you're wondering, and you should be. Everybody knows the headline version. Heavy world, tough people, don't push them. But the truth is stranger and worse than the headline. It's the gravity, mostly. The cradle worlds run heavy. Iris's homeworld, a place called Thessaly's Reach, sat at a little over twice standard gravity. Twice. Think about what that means. Every step, every lift, every fall, every heartbeat happening under twice the weight. A human raised there isn't bigger than a colony human. They're often smaller, stocky, dense, compact, because tall things break under that load. But they are strong in a way the galaxy genuinely does not have a category for. Their bones are laid down like cable. Their muscles develop tension that would tear a normal creature apart. Their tendons store and release force like a drawn weapon. A Deathworld human moving at full effort under standard gravity is, and the Korath have a word for this, ironically, Thelvaron. The unfair thing. A body operating with twice the leverage it was built to need. And it's not just the strength, it's the wiring. You don't survive on a Deathworld by being strong. Plenty of strong things die there every day. You survive by being fast, not muscle fast, nerve fast, reaction fast. By having a brain that processes threat and response so far below conscious thought that the conscious mind is still catching up when the body has already moved. By being able to go from total stillness to total violence in a window of time so small the galaxy's instruments have trouble measuring it. Iris Calder was small and pale and quiet, and she came up to the middle of Garak's chest. And she could have killed every cadet in that mess hall before the closest one finished standing up. She just didn't want to. That was the whole thing. That was the part nobody saw. The stillness wasn't weakness. The stillness was mercy. She was a loaded weapon walking around with the safety on, and she kept it on day after day because she understood something the rest of us didn't. That the most dangerous thing in the room, has the most reason to be gentle. Garak never understood that. To him, gentle meant weak, quiet meant scared, and so he kept pushing and pushing and pushing, walking deeper and deeper into the long grass, certain the small, still thing in front of him was prey. The thing that finally broke it didn't even involve Iris at first. It involved me. I keep coming back to that. Of all the people on the spire, of all the ways it could have gone, the thing that finally took the safety off was me. A soft-furred Wesson who'd never won a fight in his life. It was late in the 11th week. We were in the hangar concourse, this huge open deck where they parked the training shuttles and ran the equipment drills. High ceiling, cold, always smelled of ozone. Cadets moved through it in streams between classes. I was carrying an equipment case back to storage, heavy for me, awkward, and I wasn't watching where I was going, and I walked straight into Garak Vel. I dropped the case. It cracked open. Tools went everywhere across the deck plating, this loud clattering mess, and the whole concourse turned to look. I will be honest with you, I have never been so afraid in my life. My whole body locked up, runaway instinct, full strength, and nowhere to run. Garak looked down at me, and he smiled. "Watch where you're going, grass-eater," he said, and he could have left it there. But there was an audience, and Garak never wasted an audience. He put one huge hand flat on my chest and shoved. I went down hard, tailbone first onto the deck plating, all the breath knocked out of me. The concourse laughed. Garak stood over me, and I could see he was just getting started. He had that look, that hunting look, the one that meant he'd found something soft and was settling in to enjoy it. He reached down and grabbed the front of my uniform and hauled me half off the ground, one-handed, like I weighed nothing. "Apologize," he said, loud, so everyone hears the little. And then a quiet voice said, "Put him down." The whole concourse went silent. Iris Calder was standing about 6 meters away. She'd come from the equipment line, still had a coil of cable over one shoulder. She wasn't tense. She wasn't in any kind of stance. She was just standing there, small and still, with that coil of cable on her shoulder, looking at Garak. And her voice, that quiet, rough voice, had said 4 words, and somehow they'd cut through the entire concourse like a blade through silk. Garak turned, still holding me up by the uniform, and he grinned wide, all those ridged teeth, because here it was. Here was the thing he'd been chasing for 11 weeks. The Deathworlder finally coming out of the corner. "There she is," he said, delighted. "The big bad Deathworlder come to save the grass-eater." He shook me a little for emphasis. I dangled. "You want him, come take him." Iris didn't move. "Put him down," she said again, exactly the same. Same tone, same flat gray calm. "He didn't do anything. Put him down and walk away, and this is over." And here is the moment. Here is the exact moment, the one I've replayed 40 times, the hinge that everything turned on. Because Garak looked at her small, still, unbothered, giving him an out, and he read it one final time as weakness, as fear pretending to be calm, as a coward making a bluff. He laughed. And then he did the one thing she'd warned the whole galaxy about, without ever once raising her voice. He pushed her too far. He dropped me, I hit the deck again, gasping, and he turned fully toward Iris, and he took 2 big swaggering steps toward her, and he reached out one massive hand to grab her by the front of her uniform exactly the way he'd grabbed me. I watched it happen. I was right there on the deck looking up, close enough to see everything. I watched Iris Calder's eyes change. That cold, old, still thing I'd seen flicker behind them in the mess hall. Weeks ago, it came up to the surface. All the way. And the coil of cable slid off her shoulder and hit the deck, and her weight shifted, just slightly, down into her heels. And the whole soft, careful patience of her drained out of her face in less than a heartbeat, and left something underneath it that I had no name for. The grass cat hadn't walked away. So there was no more reason to be still. I need you to understand the speed of it. Because the speed is the whole thing. The speed is why people don't believe me. Garrock's hand was already moving. That big plated hand, reaching for the front of her uniform, and Garrock was fast. I told you, he topped the close combat rankings. He'd put Adrenic on the mat before I could see the throw. This was a creature built like a siege door who moved like a closing trap. His hand crossed maybe a third of the distance. And then it didn't exist anymore. I mean, it was still attached to him, but it was no longer where it had been, and it was no longer doing what he'd intended, and I genuinely could not tell you how it got from one state to the other. There was no in-between for my eyes to catch. Iris had moved. That's the only way I can say it. She had moved and the moving was done, and I'd missed it the way you miss a spark. There's dark, and then there's light, and your eye fills in a line between them that was never really there. She'd stepped inside his reach. Not back away from the grab, that's what you'd expect, what any normal creature does, retreat. She'd gone the other way, forward, into him, under the reaching arm, and she'd caught his wrist with one small pale hand. That's all, she just caught his wrist. And Garrock Vel, 300 kilos of heavy world Korath, stopped like he'd hit a bulkhead. I want to describe his face, because his face is where the story really lives. For one full second, Garrock did not understand what had happened. You could see it. The grin was still there, half-formed, the leftover of the swagger that had carried him across the concourse. His body was still leaned into the grab. His brain hadn't caught up. Then he tried to pull his hand back. And it didn't come. I watched him pull. I watched the muscle stand out along that thick green-gray arm, the cords of it, the real and considerable strength of a creature who'd never once in his life met something he couldn't move. I watched him put weight into it, lean back, haul. Iris's arm didn't move. Her stance didn't shift. Her expression didn't change. She held his wrist with one hand the way you'd hold a child's, and Garrock Vel pulled against her with everything he had, and the only thing that happened was that his boots began, very slightly, to slide forward across the deck plating. She was holding still, even now, even with the safety off. She was still holding still, not striking, not throwing, just standing there with his wrist in her hand, letting him feel it. Letting him understand. The grin came off his face one piece at a time. I've never seen anything like it. The delight went first, then the certainty, and then underneath, this thing I had honestly never thought I'd see on Garrock Vel, this thing I'd seen on so many other faces, faces he'd put it on, mine included. Fear. Real fear. The bottom dropping out kind. The kind where some old animal part of your brain that you didn't even know you had stands up and screams predator, and your whole body floods cold. For 11 weeks Garrock had been the predator. And in that 1 second on that cold concourse, under that dull orange light, with one small pale hand around his wrist, he found out all at once, all the way, that he had never been the predator at all. He'd been walking through the long grass. You should have stopped, Iris said. Quiet, rough, conversational almost. She wasn't shouting. She never once shouted in this whole thing. That's something I think about a lot. The loudest cadet on the spire, and she put him down without ever raising her voice past the level you'd use to order food. 11 weeks, she said. I gave you 11 weeks. I gave you an out about 40 times. You took my food, I let it go. You put me into walls, I let it go. You called me every name you had, and I let it go because none of it mattered and none of it was worth what I'd have to do to stop it. Her grip didn't tighten, it didn't need to, but something in her voice did. But you put your hands on him. He's never hurt anybody. He couldn't if he tried. And you picked him up off the ground for fun. Garrock said something. I don't think it was words. It was more of a sound. So now I'm going to show you the difference, she said, between someone who can't fight back and someone who chooses not to. And then she let go of his wrist. I flinched, expecting I don't know what, a strike, the throw, the thing the whole concourse was holding its breath for. It didn't come. She let go and she stepped back, and she put her hands down at her sides, and she stood there small, still, open, and she said, "Go on, you wanted the Deathworlder. Here she is, take your shot." Nobody breathed, I mean it. The whole concourse, hundreds of cadets, 60 species, total silence. Even the station hum seemed to drop away. Garak stared at her. He was cradling his wrist against his chest now, and I realized he was doing it without thinking, the way you protect a part of yourself that's just learned it can be hurt. His breath was coming fast and ragged. The fear was all over him now, naked, and everybody could see it. And that, I think, is what made him do the worst thing he could possibly have done. Because Garak Vel had been the biggest thing in the room his whole life, and the fear was unbearable to him, and there was an audience watching him be afraid. So he attacked. He roared. That hull-breech laugh turned inside out into something desperate, and he threw himself at her with everything. A real strike, no swagger in it, the full trained violence that had topped the rankings every cycle. A blow that would have shattered the ribs of anything else on that deck. Aimed right at her, committed, unstoppable. And Iris Calder did the thing I will remember until I die. She caught it. Not blocked, caught. She brought up one hand and took his fist out of the air mid-swing, that whole 300-kilo committed strike, and it stopped dead against her palm with a sound like a hammer hitting clay, this deep flat thwack that I felt in my teeth from 6 meters away. Garak's entire body jolted from the impact. The force he'd put into that blow went somewhere, and the somewhere was not Iris. It traveled back up his own arm, and I saw his shoulder wrench, saw his feet leave the ground for a fraction of a second and come back down wrong. She'd caught his hardest punch in one hand the way you'd catch a tossed ball from a child. And then gently, this is the part, gently, she folded his fist closed inside her hand and she pushed. Just pushed. A steady, slow, irresistible pressure walking him backward across the deck. He fought it. He dug in, threw his weight, everything, and he went backward anyway, boots screeching across the plating, one slow step at a time, this mountain of a Koreth being walked backward by a girl half his size, until his back hit the side of a parked training shuttle with a hollow boom. And she stopped. She held him there pinned, his own fist still folded shut inside her hand, and she leaned in close, and she said something to him that only he could hear. I never found out what it was. I asked her much later and she just shook her head. Whatever it was, Garak Vel's face came apart when he heard it. Not anger, not even fear anymore, something quieter and worse. The face of someone being told a true thing about themselves that they'd spent their whole life running from. Then she let him go. She stepped back, opened her hand, put it down at her side. And Garak Vel slid down the side of the shuttle and sat on the cold deck plating, cradling his hand, and did not get up. Here's what nobody expected. She didn't gloat. She didn't turn to the crowd. She didn't say one word to the hundreds of cadets who just watched the most dangerous person any of them had ever seen reveal exactly what she was. She turned around and she walked over to me, still sitting on the deck where I'd been dropped, and she crouched down and her face was already changing back. The cold still thing was draining out of it. The patience was coming back. By the time she reached out a hand to help me up, she was just Iris again. Small, quiet, careful. The grass cat had lain back down in the long grass. "You okay?" she asked, quiet just for me. I couldn't talk, I nodded. She pulled me to my feet, so easily, so carefully, like I was made of paper, and I understood for the first time that she'd always been that careful, every single day with every single person, because she had to be, and she picked up my dropped equipment case, and she handed it to me and she said, "Come on. I'll walk you to storage." And we left. We just left behind us. The concourse stayed dead silent, and Garak Vel stayed on the deck, and 300 cadets stood frozen, and nobody, not one of them, said a single word until we were gone. The instructors found out, of course. You can't have something like that happen in front of 300 witnesses and not have it reach command by the next shift. I was sure she'd be expelled, disciplined at the absolute least. That's how the spire worked. Violence between cadets got you broken back down to nothing, no matter the cause. They called her in. They called me in too as a witness, and I told them everything, the whole 11 weeks, the food and the walls and the names and Garrock's hand on my chest. I was shaking the whole time. I thought I was condemning her. Then they called in the others. And here's the thing I learned about that day. 300 cadets had watched, and not one of them lied. Not one. Drenix and Korath and species I didn't even have names for, every single one of them told the instructors the same thing. That Garrock started it. That he'd been starting it for weeks. That she'd given him every chance to stop. That she'd caught his strike and walked him to a wall and let him go without leaving a single mark on him. That last part mattered more than anything. She hadn't left a mark on him. Think about what that means. A Deathworld human, fully unleashed, and Garrock Vel walked away with a wrenched shoulder and a bruised hand and his life and all his teeth. She'd had every right and every ability to break him into pieces, and instead she'd used precisely, the amount of force needed to make a point, and not 1 gram more. The instructors are not soft people, but they understood control when they saw it. Control is the entire thing they're trying to teach, and most cadets never learn it. And here was a girl who'd shown more of it under more provocation than any of them had managed in their careers. They didn't expel her. They didn't even discipline her. What they did, and I only found this out years later, was quietly flag her file for the kind of program they don't put on the public roster. The kind they pull people into when they realize the person in front of them is operating in a category the standard training was never built for. Garrock was a different story. He wasn't expelled either, surprisingly. But something in him had broken on that deck, and it never quite set right. The crowd that used to follow him drifted off within a week, the way crowds do when the thing they were standing behind turns out to be hollow. He got quiet. He kept to himself. He stopped topping the close combat rankings, not because he got weaker, but because something about the way he came at a fight had changed. The certainty was gone out of it. I almost felt sorry for him, almost. I asked Iris about it, weeks later, back in the observation gallery with Malek's dull orange light pouring through the long window. I asked her the question I'd been holding the whole time. Why didn't you stop him sooner? You could have ended it the first day, the protein brick. You could have caught his hand right there and saved yourself 11 weeks of it. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "When I was small, my mother told me something. She said where we come from, strength isn't the rare thing. Everybody's strong back home. The planet makes you strong or it kills you. There's no third option." She watched the star. She said the rare thing, the thing that's actually hard, the thing worth being proud of, is being strong and choosing not to use it. Anybody can hit. The whole galaxy can hit. Standing there and taking it when you know exactly what you could do back, that's the hard part. That's the part that means something. She turned and looked at me with those flat gray eyes, and for once they weren't measuring me. They were just tired. I didn't stop him sooner because every day I didn't stop him was a day I was the person my mother raised. The second I caught his hand, that was over. I knew the look they'd all give me after. I knew what I'd become to them. I'd stop being Iris and start being the Deathworlder, the thing they're all scared of. I liked being just Iris. I wanted to keep being just Iris as long as I possibly could. She looked back out at the star. "He took that from me when he picked you up off the floor," she said. "Not when he took my food, not when he hit me, when he hurt someone who couldn't hurt him back for fun in front of everyone. That's the line. That's the only line. You can do almost anything to me and I'll let it go, but the strong don't get to torment the weak in front of me. Not while I'm standing there. Not ever." I didn't have anything to say to that. I'm not sure there was anything to say. We sat and watched the star burn for a while. That was a long time ago now. Iris Calder finished her training. So did I, somehow, though I think we both know I'd never have made it through without her walking next to me through the worst of it. We went different directions after the spire. She went into the program they'd flagged her for, the one off the public roster, and I went into logistics, where a Wesson who's good at noticing things turns out to be quietly valuable. I've seen her a handful of times since. She's older now, still small, still quiet, still sits with her back to the wall. There's gray coming into the dark hair now, real gray, not the field knife cut. She's done things I'm not allowed to know about and seen places that don't have names yet, and through all of it she stayed exactly what she was on that deck. The most dangerous thing in the room and the gentlest, and somehow those were never two different things. The galaxy still says it about Deathworlders. Don't push them, don't crowd them, don't make them angry. People say it like it's about the danger, like it's a warning about how hard they can hit. But I was there. I saw the whole 11 weeks, not just the 6 seconds at the end. And I know what the warning is really about, even if the galaxy's forgotten. It's not don't push them because they'll hurt you. It's don't push them because they have spent their entire lives learning not to, and the kindest, most patient, most careful people you will ever meet are the ones holding back the most, every single day, just by standing still. And if you mistake that holding back for weakness, and you push and push and push until you finally make one of them stop holding back, that's not their failure. That's yours. Garak Vel learned that on a cold concourse under a dull orange star, with one small pale hand folded around his fist. I just wish he'd listened the first 40 times she told him quietly. It would have saved him the trouble of finding out loud.